Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Big Dreams, Great Teams podcast, where we help you as a small business owner navigate the complexities of hiring, leadership, and team. I'm Paula Maidens, your host and hiring and leadership coach, and I'm here today to talk to you about reference checks. Now, potentially not the sexiest of topics, I know, so don't worry, I'm going to keep it short, sharp, and to the point, because as a small business owner, I know you're wearing all the hats, and I know you agree that hiring the right people into your business is one of the most crucial, but also most challenging parts of running your business. So I'm talking to you today about the often overlooked step of the hiring process, which is reference checks. We're going to discuss whether you should do them, how they can be beneficial, tips for making them effective, and what to do if you receive a bad review, a bad reference check, which has happened to me. So let's dive in. First up, let's talk about whether we should actually even bother doing reference checks. So should you even bother? And the answer is yes. Now, why? Because if somebody can save you the pain of a bad hire by giving you their opinion or sharing with you their experience, then this is going to be time well spent and information well gathered. Because as a small business owner, every single hire is a significant investment, and often it's money going out the door rather than staying in your pocket or being allocated elsewhere. So of course, you want to ensure that you're bringing the right people into your team, not just for their skills, but also for their personality fit with you, with team, with the systems you've set up, and with the culture that you have in place at the moment and the one you're trying to create. So reference checks can provide you a unique and different perspective that you would get from an interview or through reading someone's resume or LinkedIn profile. They'll offer you an insight into somebody's past performance with a different employer or a different client, which will give you some insight into their work ethic and their character. So it'll give you insight into the how they'll do their job. You know, in the interview, no doubt you've talked a lot about what you want them to do. You've talked about skills or experience, and you've probably talked a little bit about the how, but a reference check, how somebody has performed in the past in someone else's business, will give you more insight into that how side of things. It's a great chance to validate the information that you've already gathered through your own hiring process. So as part of my hiring mastery method, we talk about the what and the how, and having like a multi-stage process where you're peeling back the layers, asking somebody about, what they've done before, but also bringing them into your reality. So when you're doing a reference check, you get to validate the information that you have already gathered through your interview process and get a sense of how a candidate has handled real life scenarios in someone else's business. So then you can think, how would that apply in our business? Next, let's talk about whether reference checks are actually helpful. Well, I've already started to touch on that, but let's recap further and dive in. Firstly, they can be helpful by verifying the accuracy of the information that you have already received through the interview process. So you get to verify, did the person really lead that project? Do the people in your team think they were good under pressure? Were they actually in that role for as long as they said? How many people were they actually leading or managing? So these are the sorts of details that a reference check can clarify and verify for you. Secondly, a reference check can provide additional information about somebody's strengths and weaknesses. So for example, the opinion of a former manager or even a colleague can give you insight into how the candidate handles feedback, how they truly work under pressure, and what sort of personality they were within the team. And this information can not only be really crucial, but especially in a small business where everybody's contribution is not only important, but it really impacts everybody else. Understanding the impact or the personality that somebody brings to the business and getting other people's insight on that can be super, super helpful through the interview process. And finally, of course, a reference check can uncover a red flag that you potentially hadn't seen before. Because if multiple references are sharing with you concerns or things about the way somebody operated in a business or what they did or didn't do, then it's definitely a red flag for you to think, do I want to bring this risk into my business? And we'll dive into that in a moment when we talk about how do you handle and what do you do if you get a negative reference check. Okay, so let's dive in now to some tips for making reference checks effective, because like anything, there's good ways to do it and there are not so effective ways to do it. So, the first tip that I want to share with you is to make sure you have specific questions prepared. You want to ask both generic but also specific questions. So, a generic question might be, in your opinion, what are the candidate's strengths and weaknesses? But a more specific question would be, can you describe a time when the person had to meet a tight deadline, or when they were unable to meet a tight deadline? Or, were there many instances when so and so wasn't able to meet tight deadlines that were set for him or her? You want to make sure you have your specific and your general questions prepared in advance so that you can fire through them really quickly when you finally get the person on the phone, because it's not always easy to actually get in communication with the person that you want to speak to as well. So you want to be prepared and you want to really value and maximize your time with them. We have a great reference check template in our hiring mastery method, which includes both the general and the specific questions. And all my clients find it really, really helpful just to be able to pull that out, work through, add in a few extra specific questions if they need to. And so that when that phone rings and somebody's ringing them back, they can actually just be ready to go. The second tip I want to share is that you should speak with multiple references. So I would really discourage you from just relying on one reference. Speak to at least two, maybe three, if you've got the time or if they're available to you, and look for people who've worked closely with the candidate. It doesn't always need to be the direct manager. However, I would encourage you to speak to at least one direct manager, because it's not always appropriate to speak to the current direct manager. In fact, I'd like to say it's not appropriate to speak to the current direct manager unless the person has resigned. And so depending on the circumstance of the person that you are interviewing, they may not have multiple other direct managers to give you. So speaking to a close colleague is also great. But the big tip here is just make sure you speak to more than one. So then naturally, you want to know who you're actually speaking to. So you want to know the person's position relevant to the person you're thinking about employing. So were you their manager? Were you their colleague? So you want to be really, really clear, because that's sometimes where people can mislead you. And I've seen this happening, particularly when I was a corporate recruiter. I saw, we used to do a lot of reference checks. I saw my clients doing reference checks, and you didn't always know who you were talking to. And sometimes people would purposely mislead you into thinking you were talking to a former manager when actually it was a colleague. So always know who you're talking to. The fourth tip is to be respectful of the person's time and, of course, be professional. As always, throughout the whole hiring process, you're representing your brand. So make sure that you're really prepared, as I said before, but also you're professional. So don't let this turn into a gossip session. Let the person know the purpose of your call. Let them know if you're going to keep the information confidential. And keep in mind that depending on the laws in your country, you may not be able to keep a written reference that you put on file confidential. So be careful of what you write down and know what you're promising there. So the fifth tip is to keep the reference check short and be really aware of the time. Don't let the conversation blow out into a 30-minute chat unless you're getting indications from the person you're speaking to that they're willing to give you that much time. Because remember, there's really not much in it for them. And finally, the sixth tip is to listen to the tone and for the pauses. Now, often when it comes to reference checks, what people aren't saying can tell you as much as what they are saying. If they're hesitating, if you ask the question, would you re-employ this person? And they and ah, or they don't really answer it, that tells you heaps. So listen for tone, listen for pauses, and listen for also what the person isn't saying, and choose to take from that a message as well. So the final thing I want to talk about is what to do if you receive bad information or if you receive a negative review, a negative reference check about somebody. And the answer is, well, it depends. Not all negative feedback should automatically disqualify a candidate from being right for your business. So you need to consider the context and the specifics. Was the feedback about a skill that isn't crucial for the role that you're hiring for? Was it about an issue that the candidate has already acknowledged to you and that they're working on? Now, I've personally received a negative review about somebody and I still hired them. That's because I felt like I understood the context of the negative, in inverted commas, the negative feedback, and the person sharing the feedback gave me lots of context, and I was able to, mentally think and bring that scenario into my business and think, well, how would I handle that if we face this here? Am I okay with that potentially happening? And my answer was yes and yes. So I went ahead and hired the person, and actually she turned out great. So if you get negative feedback, the first thing to do is to cross-check it with the feedback that you've gotten from other references, and to cross-check it with the information that you've gathered through your own hiring process. And if it doesn't feel right to you, then you always have the option to revisit part of your assessment or reopen your assessment process by digging into that. So for example, if you got feedback that somebody's skills wasn't quite up to speed, then you could invite them back into the office to show them the role, to give them a little more information and put them in front of the system or the software, or get them to do the thing so that you can understand it a little bit more. So that's a way to dig into it and get more information yourself, to bring it into your scenario without actually disclosing that the information and the digging around is because of what's come up through a reference check. So make sure you cross-check it, validate it for yourself, and where possible, bring it into your reality, your circumstances, and work out if it's going to be an issue. However, if multiple people have shared similar concerns or a range of concerns, then it's really worth considering, well, is this person right for me? Because as a small business, every person has a big impact, not just on you, but on each other and on every person in the team. So, you want to weigh up, well, is the risk of this person potentially acting like that or not being able to do that worth it? And do I want to expose my business and my team to that? That said, no candidate is ever perfect. And the point of your hiring process and your interviewing and assessment piece in this hiring process is to identify the gaps and identify what you can train and identify whether your business can handle whatever gap you identify. So under our hiring mastery method, we talk about getting really, really clear upfront on your hiring criteria. And that is what you need the person to do, but also how you want them to do it. And then once you're clear on that criteria, being able to state and highlight, well, these are our must-haves and these are our nice-to-haves. So if something comes up in the reference check that falls into the nice-to-have category, then you might think, okay, I thought the person had that, but perhaps reference checks has identified they don't quite have that skill to the level we need, but it's okay. It's only on our nice to have list because we can train in it. However, if it's on something on the must have list, then I would encourage you to reassess, to dig into it even further, and to probably not hire them, because if they don't meet your must-have criteria and you're not sure, then you shouldn't be inviting them into your business. That's a wrap on today's episode about reference checks. And if you want to learn more about the hiring mastery method, where we do cover reference checks in module 3, interviewing confidence, then I'm really excited to share with you that you can now dive in and learn the hiring mastery method at any time. Yay! You can dive in and get started whenever you want to. Plus, you get to join up to 3 group implementation calls. So for the 3 months after you purchase, which I think is a really great way to get started at any time and to get some hands-on help as you're moving through and implementing what you're learning into your business. So that is now available, and the cost is $9.99, and there are payment plans. However, because we've just released it in this new on-demand format, I'm very excited to share with you that as a podcaster, you can get a coupon code, which is podcast24. I'll put it in the show notes, and you can get a discount down to $699. So $300 off that. And that is all Australian dollars. So if you're interested in learning the hiring mastery method, that is available for you. Go and check it out. paulamaidens.com/hiring mastery. Grab the coupon code podcast24, and that will get you a discount so you can dive straight in, start the learning, and join the group implementation calls whenever you're ready. Okay, and if you're listening to this after the end of August, because this offer is only valid to the end of August, then reach out to me at paulamaidens.com and I'll see what I can do. Okay, so I hope that this conversation has given you a clear understanding of whether reference checks are a good use of your time, because they are. They're an important step in the hiring process. And I really encourage you to invest the half an hour, the hour of your time to actually validate and get this extra piece of information about somebody before you invite them into your business. So thank you for tuning in today. If you found this episode helpful, as always, please subscribe, share it with your network for more insights on hiring and leadership. I'll be back here next week. And until then, happy hiring.